Our first speaker is Potapenko, and she is going to talk about the art of secure architecture. Julia is the security software engineer at Cossack Labs, and actually she's building convenient and affordable data security and encryption solutions. She has a background experience in mobile app development, and she helps customers to choose and implement security controls for their products. Please, Julia, the stage is yours.
I'm a security software engineer at Cossack Labs with background in mobile security, mobile software development. Cossack Labs is a data security company with focus on cryptography, and my personal specialization is mobile app security. When I was an iOS developer, I understood one important thing, that while my part of code can use industry best practices, the architecture of the app in general may bring some weaknesses to our product. So I decided to dive a little deeper into this topic. Oh, 1 second. Okay. I want to start my talk with discussing secure architecture, like in general. You can find a lot of recommendations, frameworks, guidelines about secure architecture, risk assessment, secure software development lifecycle. But such recommendations often looks like they were designed for large and enterprise companies. Today, I would like to focus on small startups, small companies, because, you know, there are a lot of startups around us. They appear and disappear every day, and all of them need to deal with security in some way. They have their distinct features. For example, fast pace in development and decision-making, feature delivery always prioritized. They have small teams with usually no security people, and tight deadlines and budget. And it's pretty common to hear this phrase that we wanted to make our product secure, but something went wrong. Security decreases usability and performance, and our user flow cannot support that, and our API cannot support that, and security feature is in conflict with another feature, and so on. And as a result, you may end up with a fragile system. But before blaming anyone or anything, let's focus on the causes. Because like no one wants to build a low quality product, and no one wants to be hacked or sued, you know. So why do we postpone security? Why do we ignore it? I think that the main reason here is security is invisible. For most companies, it doesn't have direct business value. It can support some features, but actually security on its own does not bring any business value. And what is more, if you add some security control to your project, you never know if it actually prevents any attacks. You never know until it fails. And good security level is never visible. That's why its importance may be underestimated. And before we proceed, let's define what do we actually mean by secure architecture. So if we're talking about architecture in general, it is usually defined as is a combination of structural decisions. So when we talk about secure architecture, it is a combination of structural security decisions, or we can say security choices, that efficiently addresses risks. The actual system risks, not theoretical one, actual for a particular system, particular project. Considering business goals. It's always about trade-offs. No one wants to sacrifice usability, performance, availability, and so on for questionable security controls. We want to address risks in cooperation with business goals, not in contradiction. But you know, small startup environment is associated with lots of pressure, like time, budget, and people make poor decisions under the pressure. And secure architecture is about decision making. People mess up the processes under the pressure, while secure architecture is about following the process. Let's stop for a moment and talk about processes. This is something you have already seen, I believe. It's a software development lifecycle. Requirements, design, develop, test, and deploy, and repeat. You can find different variations of it as well. And when we talk about SSDLC, secure software development lifecycle, it means that we add some security actions to each of these steps. Of course, there are also different other schemes and variations of it with different details. When we talk about secure architecture, we want to focus on the first two phases, on requirements and design. It is the core of the architecture. And actually, building secure architecture is also an iterative process. You define business goals, you assess risks and trade-offs, you make architectural decisions, you build it, and you repeat again and again. If we are talking about small startups, first of all, we need to focus on risk assessment. It's my personal opinion and my suggestion. And it's always a good thing to document everything, all our thoughts, all our risks we find. It will be very useful for next steps. Risk assessment may sound like something scary, unknown for you, but actually it is pretty similar process to what you do in your daily life. Assessing risks is not limited to technologies and finance and so on. And you have probably already noticed that I have the word art in the title of my talk. It's because I wanted to show you the next analogy. Imagine you're an artist and you want to gift your friend a painting, a portrait. But you know that your friend is somewhat picky. Here we have our goal, we have our vision, and we outlined some risks, like our friend is picky. So you should probably make your work as perfect as possible. And after that, you think about techniques you can use. For example, you think about watercolors, to pick watercolor painting. You consider it's trendy and not expensive, but you know, watercolors are somewhat transparent, so they do not allow you to make mistakes. And you can the paint may mix incorrectly. So if you make a mistake, you need to start from the very beginning. And it is one of the risks of using this paint. On the other hand, you can put oil paint. It is more flexible. You can make some mistakes because you can apply paint in some layers and cover your mistakes. But the problem here is it is very expensive. All this stuff, all the tools, canvas, paints itself, and so on. And also your personal opinion that it is not so trendy, not so modern, and probably want something else. You can look for a trade-off, for example, for gouache paint. Unlike watercolors, it's opaque, so you can cover your mistakes. And at the same time, gouache paint is water-based, so you can achieve some effects similar to watercolors. Sounds like a good trade-off, right? And now you can make a decision and accept risks it brings. While gouache paint may seem like a perfect trade-off, you can still pick watercolors and deal with the risks. So if you make a mistake, just start from the beginning. If you have enough time, you can do that. This is how risk-based decisions are made. What can go wrong here? Lack of time, not assessing risks. As a result, you start painting and picking not the best option. If you pick tools first, you limit yourself and lack of awareness. Well, you need to know details about different options to choose the best option. And actually, doesn't it sound familiar to what we have with security in our software. If you understand this example, you are definitely able to make some basic risk assessment. For example, you can try to answer these very basic questions for your product, for your company, for what you are doing. Let's take a look at this example of food delivery service. You know, it's one of these services when you order food from a restaurant on a website or a mobile application. And so we can try to answer all these questions and see um, what the risks can be there. Okay, what is important for our business? Pretty straightforward. It's profit. What do I want? I don't want to share or lose as a user? Probably if I'm buying something, there will be my credit card number. So I want to make sure that my credit card is safe. What sensitive data or PII can be there? It's obvious. It's your name, address, phone. So these are the assets you want to protect, right? Do I need to be compliant with any regulations? It's pretty popular topic. You probably have already heard about GDPR and its analogy in the United States CCPA. Why my company may lose a lot of money? Okay, it's a food delivery service. So if the service is down, if your backend is down, then no one can make an order and you're losing your money. Pretty straightforward, right? So availability issues. And how actually reputational damage is important to you? Probably a lot, because there are a lot of players on the market who are doing food delivery, right? So this is pretty straightforward, is for me. And let's assume we know some risks. Now we can try to measure them, to make a comparison so we can prioritize our work. You can think of possible damage, attack surface like entry points to your system, attack frequency and probability, how profitable or just interesting the attack is. You know, some people like they don't want to steal money, but they like to bring things for fun. Then you can think of required level for an attack. Look what other controls you already have to prevent this attack, and calculate the cost of the implementation for security controls and the cost of mitigation. Okay, we're back to our scheme again. We have our vision of risks now. We documented them. Then we start making decisions and designing. And then we build. Here I say be creative in making structural decisions. And then pick tools. I use the word creativity as opposed to industry guidelines, technology expertise, and tools, because creativity, the ability to create, is the use of imagination or original ideas to create something, inventiveness. When you design a system, you're solving specific cases. General guidelines are maybe way too general. Your experience may be a way too technology specific. Tools may limit your thinking and decisions as well. So you need to be creative and have a vision of what you actually want to achieve. There is one more thing I want to add here, is communication. I've placed it on architectural decisions, but actually it is relevant to all the steps. There are a lot of points of view around us, and you want to consider them when making decisions. All these people see your application from different angles. You don't want to end up, for example, with a secure app running on an outdated environment, right? Building secure architecture is not a single person responsibility. You may need to talk to even more people than you expected from the beginning, because their opinion really matters. And still, this question is pretty common. Why engineers can't make it secure, meaning software engineers? Because secure architecture and secure coding is different things. The thing software engineers can do is write secure code. And we need to consider the difference between these two notions. Secure architecture is about decision-making process. It's based on risks and business goals. It's an abstraction. And secure coding is mostly based on industry guidelines, and it is specific to platform. So you operate risks and business goals, abstracting from the tools when you build in secure architecture. And when you're writing the code, you operate with tools. You don't make or influence anyhow business decisions. So secure architecture is about creating structure, and secure coding is about adding details. Understanding these differences may save you a lot of time. I'll show you an example. It's about one mobile application. So the company created a mobile app for their store, so the users can pay with the app with no interaction with other people. And then stakeholders discovered that the fraud level is way too high. And they asked software engineers to check what is wrong, to investigate and fix the issue. And after a couple of months, engineering team arrived with basically nothing. One of them asked stakeholders, what was the actual percentage of fraud? And after some investigation, it appeared that the actual percentage was the average, or even better than average for this industry. There were no technical issues with the app. The team missed the risk at the beginning, the risk that the fraud amount may change as they're using another payment system. Remember our SSDLC scheme? So this is where the architectural decisions are made, while this is where software developers are. Usually they are maybe involved in a risk assessment process, but they do not work with business goals, you know. So it's always about communication between all of these parties. Another example, it's about the feature called force upgrade. Unlike for websites, you can't upgrade your desktop or mobile applications right away, and users may skip important updates, important security updates, and continue using the old versions. And so this is one of the risks here, that the old app version may be vulnerable, and you can do nothing with it. So there is such mechanism as force upgrade when your backend knows the latest version and validation happens on backend or client side, and then some error handling logic is added so the user cannot use the app without the update. And usually this is some very specific logic for the application, not like for all the other errors that may appear. If the app is already released, it take more time to implement this feature, because usually error handling logic is already there and you need to update it, and probably update it for both client and backend. So if this feature is postponed, which happens pretty often, if the risk was missed at the very beginning, error handling logic was already implemented, then the team discovers that they actually need force upgrade feature. A lot of communication should happen then, and only then we can update error handling logic, add some logic to the backend, and add our feature. But as you can see, if you think about this feature from the very beginning, if we thought about all the risks at the moment we were designing our architecture, when the architect, for example, communicated with the dev team, they have they could identify these risks at the very beginning. So the error handling logic would have been implemented correctly from the very beginning, and they can just add this feature without all these extra steps and save a lot of time. So actually just adding a little bit more time for assessing risks at the beginning could have saved all this time. It's much better to catch such things during the first stages uh, when we think about risks and design. And let's get back to our scheme again. I want to give some tips for, as we're talking about small companies, small startups, I want to give some tips here because again, it looks like something for large companies, something for enterprise companies and so on. We have already discussed what you can make when you do risk assessment, how you can identify sensitive assets, like answering the questions I've mentioned at the beginning. Then you design, discuss these things, discuss your architectural decisions. We've already covered this part about secure coding. Another thing that may be helpful here is adding some tools for static analysis. They are useful not only for security, but to write clean code in general and well formatted, for example. Then, of course, you do not have a team of penetration testers in your small startup, right? And you don't want to hire an external team of security engineers to check your code. The thing you can do here, you can create a so-called security checklist. It's a checklist mentioning all your security features. So when you're doing your releases, you can go step by step and check that everything is in place. Another thing you can do is to improve your CI and add dependency checkers here, and static and dynamic analysis security testing tools, SSDLC. And when we deploy, it would be nice to monitor security related events, for example, login attempts or something like that. And it would be nice to have something like a responsible disclosure, like a contact, an email where people can contact you if they find some problem. It's easy to make, and it can really save your reputation because person will write you to your email and not tag you in Twitter, you know. Okay, so we have some tips for the case when we want to start incorporating secure software development lifecycle into our process, like when we are still developing our application. But what about the worst case scenario here? Something like that. Have you ever caught your development team in the situation when the very first step release is coming, but it lacks security completely? This is a tough one, right? Let's do everything step by step here. First, we've already discussed some basic steps that we can make here for requirements. You gather your risks, answer the questions we had, then you can measure them. We've mentioned some criteria you can use, and you can prioritize them to see what is the most important here, because you will not be able to cover everything when your release is coming, right? Then start with what you have. Align everyone, use everyone, expertise, communicate and communicate again. And so when you book some time for a team, book not only for implementation, but book some time for communication as well, because it may take even more time than implementation of security features. And when we develop the software, when we are developing our security controls, build them step by step. Make sure basic security functionality is working, and then improve. it's better to release at least some security controls rather than try to cover everything, be late with deadlines, and release a completely unprotected app, right? Then for testing, I recommend using security checklists again. It will help you check everything before the release, and it will help you to track if you have already implemented everything you wanted. And when you deploy, set up an alerting. If you are aware of some really critical event that may happen when you need to, like very critical that can cause a lot of damage, it's better to have some alerts to cover this. And you have you have to prepare a plan B for it. So if you have some critical event that may cause a lot of damage to your company, you can have something like force upgrade that we have already mentioned, or feature flags, or another way to turn some features off, or maybe just to shut down everything, just to minimize possible damage. And let's summarize quickly here. I have 3 main thoughts I want to highlight from my talk. Book time for your security in advance. The less pressure you have, the best decisions you can make. Stick to SSDLC as early as possible. If you spend at least 5% of your time for it, you will be able to improve and maintain the security level of your project. And the last one, secure architecture is not a single person responsibility. The communication is always the key here. So thank you for your time. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you so much. Okay, so if you have questions to Julia, please ask them in the Q&A. And I have actually a question to you, Julia. It is about communication. You highlighted that it's very, very important to communicate and over-communicate. What are your tips for that, the best practices, the top 3 things that work for you?
On the very first phase of working on security controls, it's important to set up a meeting with stakeholders, the people who own the decisions here, just to see what are their priorities. So the architect and maybe tech leads are aware what is the most important from the business perspective. Then it's great to have regular meetings, weekly or bi-weekly. And also, it's very important to have meetings when some new feature is coming, the team can review it. And actually, there is a problem that there are a lot of people involved, and it's hard to find time when everyone can join the same meeting. So you can make it again step by step. You can start with one team reviewing it, gathering their feedback, then another team can review it, gather their feedback, and if it's necessary, they can communicate again and come to some decisions. So I think there can be a lot of reasons to have a meeting about the security. And actually, if it's happening at the very first stages of when we are building the architecture, these meetings are frequent with different levels, like management, developers, architects, and so on.
Thank you so much. We have 2 other questions. First, can you recommend some open source security scanning tools?
Okay, it depends on your stack of your technologies you are using. Of course, scanning tools. I can recommend you to go to, for example, to OWASP website, which has recommendations for different technologies and tools their own tools for scanning for vulnerabilities, and they also recommending a lot of different tools for different technologies, and you can read their guidelines depending on your stack and pick what you like.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And another question, you already talked about tips for small startups, but what about bigger companies? Can you give tips for security tips for these cases, please?
Yeah, my main tip here will be, if you have some money and time for security, you should definitely build your own security team or hire a security team externally. Because, for example, you saw the web stage for secure code review. It requires some expertise, so it should be a specific person who knows this particular language, this particular technology or system. So it's better to find people who can work with your particular case related to security. And one recommendation that I have here also about the communication again is if you have room to add better security to your project, it's better to plan, book time, like, for example, having security sprints. Like you have 3 regular sprints and then 1 sprint for security features. Or you can book, for example, 5% of your time. So at least like 1 ticket or 2 security tickets can be covered during the sprint. So these are my 2 main recommendations here.
Thank you so much for this talk, Julia. And as a gift from the craft team, this is your very special and unique mug. You can see your face, the picture of your face here.
So cute.
We are going to mail this to you. So thank you so much.